All right. Hello, everyone. This is the session titled The Changing Face of Elder Abuse, Problems and Solutions. My name is AJ Garabedian. I'm a district attorney with the Bucks County District Attorney's Office. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Brendan Corballis. Before I do, I wanted to mention a few matters to make things run smoothly. Hopefully you figured out from the previous sessions to keep your microphone muted, and we just ask that you keep your video off. There's going to be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and you can either unmute at the end, or you can submit them through the chat box. Each session is going to be recorded and made available on the community college's YouTube page, and that'll be approximately within a week or two following the symposium. Lastly, in order to receive continuing education credits for today's symposium, you're going to need to complete the evaluation form by the end of today that was sent by email. So I'd like to move on to introduce our speaker. Brendan Corballis serves as Assistant Director of Victim Services at the Senior Law Center, where he co-manages a team of 8 attorneys and 9 legal advocates. The team provides free, direct legal services to older victims of crime in Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, and Philadelphia counties. Brendan personally handles all litigation in Bucks County and works closely with the Area Agency on Aging, as well as my office, the District Attorney's Office. Prior to coming to Senior Law Center, he worked with federally qualified health centers throughout Philadelphia, representing low-income clients in a wide range of legal matters, including Social Security appeals, divorce, child custody, evictions, personal document planning, and guardianships. Brendan received his Master's of Fine Arts from Yale University and his JD from Villanova University. Thank you for sharing with us today, Brendan, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, AJ. Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan. That was a lovely introduction, but I wish I could see all of your faces. What we do here today at the Neff, they ask that the videos be off until the end. I wanted to talk to you today about elder abuse and give you a brief overview of what I hope to accomplish during this session. First of all, a disclaimer, I had hoped that this would be very interactive, and I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, please let us know in the chat. I had hoped this would be a much more interactive session, which I would prefer, more discussion-like. Death by PowerPoint is not my favorite thing. That being said, of course, I have a PowerPoint. I'm not going to read the PowerPoint to you. I will use it to refer to some things that I'd like to talk about, and I may read certain portions of it to you, but you're all capable of reading. And really, what I'd like to do is provoke a discussion. The reason that I named this session The Changing Face of Elder Abuse is because we are in a position which is sort of unique. We are becoming an older nation, and we'll get into some of the statistics in a moment. But more and more people are being considered older adults. And, today's grandma and grandpa are not yesterday's grandma and grandpa. We consider an older adult to be 60 years of age or older. And we have clients from 60 all the way up to over 100 years of age. So it's a wide spectrum. It's not a block. There's no such thing as a senior citizen, really. It's just something we make up in our head. Despite the name of senior law, we're really talking about older adults. I think that's important because it's easy to sort of make it a sweeping category, older people or the elderly. And it's not that. We're talking about individuals. They happen to share one characteristic, which is they're 60 years and over. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the legal solutions and remedies to some of the problems that we see, but this is not a legal presentation. It's going to be from a lawyer's perspective, but it's really a discussion about what we're seeing on the ground and some of the thoughts that I have about the work that we do at Senior Law Center. So it's not going to be a deep dive into lots of legalese or anything like that. I'm going to do the big share of the screen. Okay, and can you all see that? Everybody good? I can't see anybody. AJ, that's good, right? Okay. So again, this is our mission. We're seeking to protect the rights of older Pennsylvanians. We're not looking to rescue anybody. We're not saviors. We're looking to empower people. We're looking to remove barriers to justice. One thing that happens as you get older is you become more and more invisible. And I don't think that's okay. So one of the things that we try to do is make sure that older adults are visible, both in the justice system and in the community, and that their voices are heard. We've been doing this work in Philadelphia for about 40 years. However, we moved to the counties, Bucks, Delaware, Chester, and Montgomery counties a few years ago with our victim service unit or victim services program. And that's the program where I work. It's one of several programs that we have at Senior Law Center, but all of the other programs are based in Philadelphia. The victim service unit has offices in Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties. So the only requirement for someone to qualify for our services is that they're 60 years or older. Now, for the victims unit or the victim service team, you do have to have one additional requirement met, which is you have to be a victim of a crime. That's a very, very broad category. We're not talking about a crime as it's written in the code or the criminal code. It doesn't have to be something that's being pursued by the police or the district attorney's office. It's basically elder abuse, right? And we have a very, very wide definition of that. But we do have that restriction because our funding comes directly from something called the Victims of Crime Act. And so we're very restricted in terms of what we can do. We don't charge for our services. All of our services and all of our programs are free. And there's no income limit. So what you make or where you live would never bar you from receiving our services if you've been the victim of elder abuse or any sort of crime. All right, and these are the counties that we're in. This is a brand new office we've just moved to. We were down in Bristol for a few years, and I'm very excited that we'll be up here in Bucks County with all of my fine partners, the district attorney's office, the AAA, Kathy Bennett, who runs this wonderful symposium, LASP, NOVA, Mike Bannon at the Consumer Protection Board. We're very happy that we'll be in the neighborhood. So that's our information. So what's changing? What is it that I'm talking about that's changing? Well, you can see the statistics here, right? The global population is aging. In Pennsylvania particularly, you can read the statistics here, but I think what's really important is that you understand that Pennsylvania is actually one of the oldest states in the United States, and I don't mean because it was one of the 13 colonies. I mean, we have more people 60 and over per capita than I think except for one other state. We're the fifth largest currently. We were at one point a little higher up the list. So that means that 1 in 4 Pennsylvanians are senior or 60 and over today. That's a big change in population from a few years back, a couple generations ago. So this is a change, right? And people are living longer, right? Life expectancy has increased. This is going on around the globe. People are living longer. They're getting better health care. Not everyone, of course, but by and large, most people are now expecting to live longer. So that's part of what's changing, right? Is that what we think of as an old person, as an elderly person, as an old adult, is really not accurate. It's sort of left over from our, storybooks and movies, right? The crotchety old lady down the lane or the mean old guy who says, "Get off my lawn." Sure, those people will always be around. I'm sure they were around in ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. But what is changing is that people who are 60 and over are not going to be invisible anymore, right? These are the baby boomers who are now moving into this position. They're going to be a very different kind of senior or older adult than what I would call the silent generation, which is the generation of folks who are now in their 90s or older. My mom's 96. So the silent generation is the one who lived through both world wars and the Depression, and we're shaped by that. And all of these factors are very important when you're working with older victims, because you have to place each person in context and allow them to identify themselves. What's not changing? Okay, something called the age stereotype paradox. So no matter how much the reality on the ground changes. We still cling to this notion about old people. They're all senile. They all have dementia. They're all cuckoo. They can't take care of themselves. They don't have romantic or sexual lives. They're depressed. They're alone. They're degenerated. They sit on the park bench and aren't able to get to the bathroom in time. All of those kinds of things. Or they're cuddly old like Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus or Kris Kringle. But these are stereotypes, and of course they come from someplace in life that was at one point true. But I think there's a disconnect, and that's why I say the changing face of elder abuse, because when you think of an elder person, what do you think of? That's sort of a question I'd like you to ponder today. And one of the things that I think we've done is we've gone from elder to elderly. What does that mean? So if you think of the word, sometimes I work with law students and I'll ask them, just throw out the first thing that comes to mind when you think of elder, right? And I usually get things like respect, wisdom, guardians of the tribe, guardians of the culture, and then I say elderly, and we get frail, right? Crotchety, senile. Unable to take care of themselves, grandma, grandpa. So if you can see this quote here, it's a wonderful quote. I will read the quote. Older people used to symbolize knowledge, wisdom, and experience, and they were respected for that. But now, in this profoundly changing and ephemeral world, we see no value in their contribution. They're no longer seen as mentors. And I think that's very powerful, and unfortunately, in my experience, it's also been true. Why am I talking about all of this stuff? What does this have to do with elder abuse? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that the society, each one of us as well, does to many people who are over 60. We victimize them again, right? By shoving them aside, by discounting them, by talking down to them. And I'm sure you've heard this sort of play between an older person and someone who may be the caregiver or help. Oh, Mom, you've got to do that now. You have to take your medicine. We start talking to people. We infantilize them. And I think that's outrageous. And so you can imagine if a person is dealing with all of that in their lives, and they're also a victim of abuse, there's a lot for them to have to face, and there's a lot of barriers for them to have to get through to seek help. All right, so just another quote about elders. All right, and it's not that older people know better, it's just that they've often made so many mistakes that they can tell you what didn't work. All right, we still have this taboo about old age and death. I think this is part of, what I've been talking about. And I would just point out before we get into some of the more specific topics of this presentation, ask yourself the question, why is ageism still okay? Right? Because it is. We still do this, right? We still lump people over a certain age together. We treat them differently. We make presumptions about them. Now, as humans, we do this all the time with everybody we meet, right? Some psychologists have said that we make about 30 decisions within the first second that we meet somebody. But this is something that also bothers me, that it's okay. Why? Why is it okay? All right, we know the statistics regarding elder abuse are really not very good. And that's because really nobody cares, and nobody has cared for a long time. And when I say nobody cares, I'm not talking about present company. I mean, I understand that everyone here is committed to doing the best that they can to prevent elder abuse or work with victims of elder abuse. But when I say we don't care, I mean as a society, right? It's not really sexy. It's not really interesting. It's not a hot button issue. But I think it's a pandemic, and I use that word, and it's a very loaded word right now, but I use it very purposefully because I think that what we're not seeing is this. It's spreading every day. There are more and more and more cases happening, right? And we can't detect it. It's a silent thing. We don't see it. We don't recognize it. So for every one case that we do hear about, it's estimated that at least 43 are never going to be reported. again, you can look at these slides, but here's something to think about. Did you know that, after you reach a certain age in our culture, in the United States, you can be excluded from polling station duties, jury service, clinical trials. Some people have difficulty voting, such as people in residential care. Your rights become a little less certain as you get older. More and more people believe that they have a right to tell you how to live your life and what you should do. And as I said, there's sort of this reverse aging process. Abusers of older people take advantage of that. People who love older people are not doing that, right? But someone who is exploiting or abusing an older victim, as you all know, abuse is about power, right? Whether it's sexual or physical or financial exploitation, emotional abuse, humiliation, it's about power and control. So one of the tools that all of the abusers that we see every day share and use is this idea of, they're old. They don't know what they're doing. She doesn't even know what day it is. That kind of thing. And it's very serious because in the wider context of society, people they don't question that. Oh yeah, I bet, that's that person's daughter, that's that person's son or grandson. Poor person is taking care of that old person. It must be very hard, and they're not even with it anymore. Well, we don't know that, but many of us will just presume that. So these are the different types of abuse and neglect that we mostly deal with. We could do hours and hours on each one of these, but I wanted to talk today particularly about financial exploitation and also about protection from abuse. Let's talk about some common myths, right? I won't read the slides, but think about this. We, as a society, tend to think about older victims of crime as sort of being in nursing homes, right? Or in long-term care facilities, where they're victims of swindles or telephone scams or things like that. That's okay. We like that. We're okay with that. It feels comfortable. What we're not okay with is the reality, which is that more than 60% of the cases that are reported, and remember, these are just the ones that are reported, 2/3 of those cases, the perpetrator is an adult child. When I say an adult child, I can tell you I've had cases where the adult child was 60 and the older victim was in their 90s. Okay, so another myth is that, you'd be able to tell if someone was being physically abused. That's not true. Educated people don't fall for scams. So if somebody felt that stupid Microsoft scam or that stupid Lonely Hearts scam, that's just because they're old and stupid. Well, don't think too highly of yourself, folks, because this is something that happens every day in our marketplace. There's a lot of scams out there, and a lot of us are prime targets for them. We may not think of them as scams, but you can sort of take that and think about that a little bit. So another myth is that, well, if an older person says they're not being abused, then they're not. That's absolutely false. I think anybody would know that one of the things that an abused person does of any age, sadly from childhood on up, is they protect their abuser. So they don't want the person to get in trouble. They also have another worry as they age. If I complain, if I come forward, I may lose my autonomy, right? Because someone's going to come in and see that I didn't, wash the dishes correctly, or I didn't make the bed, or the laundry's piled up. And people know that this is something that can happen to them, right? They can be told, well, this is for your own good, but we're going to take you out of your home. It does happen. All right. Also, the idea that elder abuse is really not that common. Well, here's some facts again, the statistics. This is a myth I think is really prevalent, and I really love the fact of it, right, which is so different from the myth. The myth is that, it's the caregivers get so stressed out, and that's why they abuse the older person. Well, that's actually not true. Real caregivers, of course, they deal with very, very serious stress, trauma, secondary trauma. It's exhausting. They're not the perpetrators of abuse. what you see more is a caregiver who really isn't a caregiver. And it's usually an older child, an older adult child, or an adult grandchild who actually is dependent upon the senior or the older person, right, for housing, for food, or transportation, as a cover when they're doing or selling drugs. And they will put themselves out as caregivers, but in fact, they're parasites. And usually they will absolutely present themselves as, oh, I'm doing everything for this person. But you don't have to dig down too far to sort of see through that. So there are so many people who are such wonderful caregivers of older adults, both in institutions and at home. And this is not about them. Unfortunately, the other type of caregiver uses that trope or that image to their advantage. So protection from abuse, we wanted to just touch on this because this is one of the most effective remedies for someone who's being physically abused of any age, but we're focusing obviously here on folks 60 and older. So if you're a lawyer or if you've been around the courts or you're a victim advocate, you're probably very familiar with the term PFA. It just means protection from abuse. Here in Bucks County, you can file and get the necessary forms. There's no filing fee by going to the Family Court Prothonotary right here in the Bucks County Justice Center. So basically, what is a PFA? It's a protective order. It can have up to maybe 3 years of relief. And it's a civil matter. It's happening in civil court. Right? We represent people almost every week, sometimes 4 to 5 cases each week. PFA day in Bucks is on Wednesdays. So that's when their hearings take place. But a person may file a PFA 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. If the court is closed, if the Court of Common Pleas is closed, then you call the police department, who will put you in touch with the local magistrate who's on the emergency duty 24/7. If you're in need of an order, you can get an emergency order. But we're talking about a civil order and a civil court. But there's some teeth to this law and there's some teeth to this order, because if the abuser violates any part of that order, they may result in what's called indirect criminal contempt. And then the Commonwealth will prosecute that case, right? An assistant district attorney will prosecute that case. But we will often accompany our clients who are because underneath each of these indirect criminal contempts, right, is a civil matter. So they really go hand in hand. We do not prosecute crimes. Only the district attorney has the authority to prosecute crimes in the name of the Commonwealth, right? We don't provide criminal defense work, right? But we may sometimes be there in these hearings. Sometimes a judge will ask us to even testify or to colloquy or to ask our clients some questions about what's happening during that proceeding. But the ADAs who run this in Bucks County are fantastic. I can't say enough about them. They're overworked and they're incredibly empathetic, and they manage to really protect people by punishing, as they should, those who violate this civil order. Okay, now the thing with PFAs that's a little confusing for a lot of people is because there's a term restraining order. Lots of states have restraining orders. We have a civil restraining order, but that's not really what people are thinking, right? They're thinking a stay-away order, a restraining order, and a lot of times we will have people say, my neighbor is harassing me, my neighbor is stalking me, my neighbor, threw a rock at my window. Well, these are crimes and they should be reported to the police department. But they'll often come and say, I want a restraining order. Right? It doesn't exist in Pennsylvania. What we're talking about when we say PFA is a very particular statute for a very particular set of circumstances, okay? So a PFA can only be filed against someone who is related to you by blood or by marriage or with whom you've had some sort of an intimate relationship. Again, the word intimate is very broadly interpreted, right? This does not mean that there was actually sexual relations between the two people. It could have just been a dating relationship. But if there was an intimate relationship between two people, or if the people are related by blood or marriage, then they qualify for this. If they don't, have that relationship, they're not going to get an order, right? So you can't go into court and say, I want this order against my neighbor. That's not the law. I think that's something that's confusing for a lot of people. So if you're talking to an older person about PFA, that's always a good thing to let them know. And then these are the steps. Again, Bucks County is pretty amazing here because what they have provided for every single victim of abuse, not just older victims of abuse, but every single victim of abuse in Bucks County who goes to PFA court will have a lawyer. Remember, we're in civil court, so there's no right to an attorney. We don't have a civil Gideon, right? Not like a criminal court. You can't afford an attorney in a civil court? Too bad. Go home. That's the way it works, folks. So what Bucks County has done is they have a series of agencies that show up every Wednesday, as well as volunteer private attorneys from the Bucks County Bar Association, so that they make sure that anyone who goes in there, plaintiff or defendant, if they wish it, will have free civil representation for that day. And I think that's really an amazing thing. We are not volunteer attorneys from Senior Law Center. We're public interest, right? So we make a salary. We don't charge our clients by the hour, right? And we're not volunteering our time. But we basically work with all of these wonderful attorneys who come in and volunteer, as well as attorneys from other agencies. So that's particular and peculiar to Bucks County, something that's good for you to know. You don't need to have an attorney to file a protection from abuse order. In fact, in many cases, it might be advisable not to, because what that particular petition is about is really the unvarnished truth of the victim. So after they file that petition, that same day here in Bucks County, they'll have an ex parte hearing, ex parte Latin legal term meaning without the other party, okay? And at that time, the judge will review the petition and possibly ask the petitioner some questions. Generally, something along the lines of, is everything that you said in this petition true? And of course, the petitioner at that point is under oath. All right. And the standard there is not that the judge says, I believe everything in here. The standard there is that the judge says, if I were to believe everything in this petition, do the facts as presented meet the statute's requirements? And that's a tough thing to do, right? Because emotional abuse is not considered abuse under the law. Stalking, harassing, these are things that are criminal behaviors. They can be dealt with in the criminal system. There is an order that you could look for, a non-stalking order, but in terms of getting a protection from abuse order, which is the strongest form of protection you can have under the civil law if you're a victim of abuse, you have to sort of be able to show that you were physically hit. You have to allege that. In the absence of being physically hit, that also could be pushed, right? If the person was pushed, if they were elbowed, right? If they were slapped in the head, right? Or if they were, in fact, punched in the stomach, which we have a case in Bucks County where an 89-year-old woman was punched in the stomach by her daughter repeatedly and ended up in the hospital. So again, this happens everywhere. So at the ex parte hearing, the judge is not determining and making a determination about the truth of the allegations. The judge is saying, if I take everything as truthful, do I have enough to grant an order? And that would mean he would have to find physical abuse, or he would have to find that, or she would have to find that there were imminent threats or threats of imminent harm. So somebody was saying something along the lines of, I'm going to kill you, right? You better watch your back, because when I get home, you don't even want to know what I'm going to do to you, right? That sort of thing. If someone's picking up a vase and not throwing it at someone, but throwing it near them, right? These could be construed as putting a person in reasonable fear of imminent harm. So there may not have been physical contact, but that's a very strong case. There are a few other things that would qualify for this statute, but for our purposes today, I won't go deeply into them. If you're a lawyer or you're a legal buff and you know about false imprisonment, that's something that's also possible, although it's very rarely pled in court. But if you falsely imprison somebody, that may rise to the level of a PFA being granted. So what happens after that is, if there is a PFA granted, and the PFA could have lots of different terms, right? Lots of different conditions. But generally, if people live together, if the defendant and the petitioner live together, remember the defendant has no idea this is going on now, okay? So what happens then is the sheriff, the police department, one of the two, will actually go and serve this court order upon the defendant, and that defendant will be removed from the home then and there. So that's usually pretty much a shock for that person, because they don't know what's been going on. And they're usually have to wait about 10 days until they go to this final hearing. That's where the judge will hear both sides, or the parties will have an opportunity to come to a settlement and negotiate the case, which is what we try to do often in civil court, is to find some common ground, especially because going into a hearing can be very re-traumatized. It really re-traumatizes folks. They have to now reiterate everything again, right? They have to sort of relive it again, and then they're subject to cross-examination. All right, so that's a protection from abuse, sort of a quick down and dirty overview, but I was told that a lot of folks were interested in really how that worked, and I just wanted to give you an idea. Bucks County, again, they do a wonderful job with this. The Bernathenissarian Family Court, a person can go and file. They have to file on their own, okay? You can't file on behalf of somebody else. Okay? The person has to file themselves. But you can go with the older person. You can help them, absolutely. All right. So financial exploitation was the other big topic that I was asked to sort of speak to. And it's another form of elder abuse, right? Here's some statistics. 7 million older victims have been the victim of financial swindle. But remember, this includes family members, right? Adult children and adult grandchildren, or spouses or cousins or siblings who are actually stealing from the older person, whether it's an embezzlement or some breach of fiduciary duty. So $60 million a year, right? And these are just some of the types that you can imagine of financial exploitation. And we'll talk a little bit about some of them in more detail. Of course, here's the first thing that people think of when they think of, financial exploitation is the telemarketers, right? The phone scams, the secret shopper scams, the IRS scam. You haven't heard of the grandparent scam. This is when they will call an older person and they identify. I mean, they're very, very good at this. This has become a multi-billion-dollar global industry. So they will call an older person at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they'll, this is so-and-so, or this is Sergeant so-and-so, or I'm a friend of so-and-so, and there's been a terrible car accident. No, your grandson is okay. I don't have a grandson. I'm sorry. I'm so rattled right now. I need your granddaughter. Your granddaughter's okay, but she has been arrested, and she needs to have, immediately she has to have $5,000 bail, and so all of these scams, regardless of how they play out, will have a certain number of factors or characteristics. One is there's a sense of urgency. It has to happen now, right? The other is that there's going to be a dire consequence for the person or for someone they love if they don't act, right? And then the other thing is they're going to require the person to, sooner than later, unless it's the romance scam, which is a little different, but sooner than later, within that first phone call, they have to make sure that the person will be compliant, right? And all they need is one credit card number or, one bank account number, and they're very, very good at what they do, people. They can call folks and make it look like it's coming from their family members. They can text people, right? I mean, you think of it, they can do it. The Lonely Heart scam is more of a slow burn, and yes, that does happen. It happens a lot, and it's a very sad scam. And again, they pick their prey. They are predators, so they very much know whom they're targeting. All right. Powers of attorney relate to financial abuse. And when I was invited to speak here, they also asked me to sort of just talk briefly about a power of attorney. So if you don't know what it is, it's a written document. It's a very powerful legal document. Okay? And what you're doing when you are drafting or signing a power of attorney is you're bestowing a great deal of power onto a third party, or what would be called an agent, right? You're the principal and that person's the agent. The reason they call it a power of attorney is because what you're actually giving that agent, who may actually be an attorney, but more likely is not, you're giving them a lot of the powers that an attorney at law would have. They can sue on your behalf. They can write checks on your behalf. They can sell your property without telling you. They can make decisions regarding your financial health and your financial investments. Okay? So it's a very powerful document. This is one of the favorite tools of abusers of older adults who are being financially exploited. And this is one of the favorite tools of the adult children or the family member. All right, mom, dad, auntie, grandma, why don't you just do this? I already help you with your bills anyway, so let's just sign this. Oh, maybe we need a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer. You just get it from the internet. And you don't need a lawyer, by the way. You should have one, but you don't actually need a lawyer. Power of attorney is so serious. It's something that people throw around now. I'm going to get a power of attorney. I'm going to make this person a power of attorney. It's a very, very serious thing because you're basically giving somebody the reins financially. And that may not always be the best choice, right? So there's durable and non-durable. Durable means that if you were to become incapacitated after the document was executed, it would remain in place, right? And non-durable is if you appoint someone and then you become incapacitated, that power of attorney automatically ends. All right? And then there's something called a springing power of attorney, which means it will come into effect at a certain time or a certain date based on an event. So, for example, should I become incapacitated, I appoint so-and-so as my agent, right? And I become incapacitated, and then that power of attorney will spring into effect. That's all having to do with how it's drafted. Now, the thing with powers of attorneys, and I know this came up in the earlier session, not directly perhaps, but, many times we'll have folks call us who are not the older person or not the client. So I'm calling on behalf of my mom, or I'm calling on behalf of my grandma, I'm calling on behalf of my brother, my sister, right? And they don't know what's going on, but they need legal help. So if that person has a valid power of attorney, which we'll ask to review, then we can go ahead and advise them because they have that power under the law because of this valid power of attorney, right? They can be spoken to as though they were the person. Absent that, we're very reticent about speaking to third parties, no matter how well-meaning they may seem, because again, this is one of the favorite tools of abusers of older folks when you're talking about financial exploitation, right? Very savvy. People are very savvy, and with the internet, things have become very easy to do, right? So there's the bait and switch. Mom, grandma, would you just sign these papers here? What is nothing important? Just sign here, just sign here, just sign here, and voila, it's done, right? It can sometimes be very hard to undo. That being said, a person can revoke a power of attorney at any time. You don't need a lawyer to do so. You just send a written notice to the person who you had selected as the agent. And of course, we would advise that you also notify your doctor or your bank or anybody else whom you gave that power of attorney to. But a revocation of a power of attorney, you don't need to go to court. You don't need a lawyer, right? It's actually fairly simple. But many people don't know that. So if you're coming in contact with somebody who says, I've given so-and-so the power of attorney and I really regret it and I don't know what to do and they're doing this and they're doing that, they can revoke it. Right? It doesn't have to be notarized, but I would recommend that it's notarized, and they can revoke it at any time. And that is valid. That revocation is valid. So financial exploitation is, I think, part of this, what I call silent pandemic, because you're having a trifecta of opioid crisis, right? You're having an aging population, and then you're having folks are not leaving home as much as they did, right? So what we see a lot of is maybe there's 4 or 5 kids in the family. When I say kids, I mean older adults, 40 and up, right? Bunch of grandkids. But there's usually, the abuser is usually the one who stayed home. And that's the one that pretends they're the caregiver. They're not a caregiver. They've never left the home because they've never grown up. And they're not there because they are grateful for their parents' help. They're there because they believe their parents owe them. Okay? And we see a lot of opioid abuse and a lot of untreated mental illness. And it's very, very sad. Right? We all know that many people end up in the court system and in courts who really shouldn't be there. They should be getting some sort of mental health. That's a bigger conversation, not for this presentation, but it's germane. It's relevant to what I'm talking about because remember, it's called family court. So nobody wants to go to family court, right? Things have gone really bad. And can you imagine what it's like if you finally have to realize that your adult child or your adult grandchild, someone you've loved and taken care of for 30, 40 years, has literally stolen every dime from underneath you? That's what happens, right? And that's an agonizing choice for people to make. And so a lot of times they don't report it and they lose, right? It impacts their housing, their food, insecurity, medication, right? And they can't recover from losses, all right? At a certain age in life, it's not as easy to bounce back, right? And just, I'll just go get a job and I'll start again. Good luck. Remember, we talked about ageism. Yeah, it's against the law to discriminate based on age, but yeah, it happens all the time. All right, and so this is really far-reaching. This type of abuse is far-reaching. Not only is it devastating emotionally, but it can literally cost people their homes, their health, sometimes their lives. We've had clients who've literally had to sell their home in order to get away from an abuser who was an adult child. That's pretty sad. All right, so these are just some questions that we like to ask when we are looking at a POA. Remember I said somebody will say, well, I'm calling on behalf of my mom or my dad, and I'm the power of attorney. Well, we'll ask to see it, right? And so we're going to look at that, and here are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. The issue of legal capacity, also a presentation unto itself, but it's very important in this context, right? Because legal capacity is not defined anywhere. It's not a statute. It's more of an art than a science. But in order for a person to execute a valid power of attorney or any legal document, they have to have legal capacity. Well, how do you prove that if it was signed 20 years ago or 10 years ago or last week? So it's a thorny issue. It's not black and white, but this is also something that abusers will play on, right? Oh no, she was perfectly fine last week. She asked me to do this. In fact, she gave me her credit card. She told me I could take, the vacation to the Bahamas, and now she's saying I stole it from her. But she's crazy. This is the kind of thing we get, and it's very difficult for those folks to have to sort of point the finger, and often they won't. So these are some of the things that you could advise a person to do if they believe that they have been the victim of financial exploitation or scams. And then these are just some of the different kinds of actions you can take in different courts. These are all civil courts, although I do mention a criminal court at the bottom, to protect assets. If there's any assets you want to preserve, you want to stop the leakage, right? And so here you have just a bunch of actions that you could bring. I'm happy to talk to anybody about it at a later point, but I'm not going to bore you to death with civil procedure. What I would like you to take away from this is that there are certain things that a lawyer can do, right, or a person can do without a lawyer to sort of stop the hemorrhaging and maybe recoup some of the assets, right? So I think that's important because a lot of times there's a sense of despair. What can I do? It's done. It's over with. And so we always urge people to contact us and let us think about it creatively. All right. So then here are some of the civil actions that we might bring to address financial exploitation. And again, financial exploitation in this context has to do with a family member or a loved one who's breached some sort of duty or who's committed a crime, but that crime has not been reported to the police, right? Because the person, the victim of that crime does not want to report it. They don't want their child to be arrested. They don't want their child to be investigated. They don't want their child, again, child, I'm talking about 50 years old, 30 years old, 28 years old, maybe 19 years old, grandchild. So we are often able to at least look at possibilities in the civil courts where we can possibly recoup something. But the civil process is very cumbersome and it's very long and it's very expensive. So we don't charge, obviously, but we're limited in how many civil litigation cases we can really take all the way through because of our own resources. So the client's not paying for our fees or anything like that. They're not paying us. But it's still a drain of time and energy and emotion. And these cases in civil court can go on for years and years and years and years. So we also bring actions in Orphans Court, which is a sort of a Pennsylvania specialty. We have this thing called Orphans Court, and it's a court of equity as opposed to a court of law, but it's the proper place to bring things like a guardianship action, or if you're alleging that someone who was an agent under a power of attorney was breaching a fiduciary duty, right? They were embezzling the money. They were taking the person's money, but they weren't spending it for the person's best interests, right? They bought a villa in France. Yes, it happens. Or they bought 2 cars, or it went up their nose or into their arm. Then this is a civil way that we can begin to unravel that and sort of do our own forensic accounting. Again, when we believe that a crime has taken place, we always urge our clients to report that. It doesn't happen. Most times they just won't. Right? And then family court, like I said, some of the things that the senior law center can do in family court and that other lawyers can do to help financial exploitation, protection from abuse, spousal support, divorce. And you think, well, what do these things have to do with financial exploitation? Well, if the financial exploitation is hand in hand with some sort of physical abuse, or at least the threat of imminent harm, the PFA may remove the abuser from the home, at least temporarily, if not permanently, and that gives the person a chance to sort of assess the damage, right? To really figure out what's going on, because accounts have to be closed, all that sort of thing. So that's one of the reasons that we bring that up. And then also spousal support, because again, if there's abuse between spouses and there's some sort of separation, usually one partner, not always, but usually one partner is less financially sound than the other. So we can make sure that the victim, if it's the victim who's really suffering from that situation, that we can help with that. And in some cases, we will do divorce, not regularly, but in some cases, but only where there's been some sort of abuse, right? So we don't just do a divorce case, but if, let's say, one of the spouses, was severely abused or just abused by the other, and the way that they can get out and detangle, right, and disengage from their abuser is divorce, because marriage is a strong contract and it binds you legally. It doesn't really matter whether you consider yourself married or not. If you're married under the law, then that's going to affect you deeply. So that's something we've done. For example, let's just say husband abuses wife. It could be the other way around. Husband disappears for 30 years, right? Husband reappears and now has claim to the house and has claim to this and has claim to that. And this person never really was able to go forward in their life because of the abuse. So that's sort of a situation where we might do a divorce for that victim. The last 2 things I'll talk about is ejectment and quiet title. I'm not going to go through them all, but I just want you to know that sometimes the way to help protect a victim is to get the abuser out of the home. So ejectment and quiet title are actions that you can take when an eviction is not proper. So if there's a landlord-tenant relationship, doesn't matter if it's grandma, grandpa, and grandchild, or mom and dad and son, if there's money being exchanged for rent, then that's an eviction. But more often what the case is that somebody came to the home. Is a family member or not? Can I crash here until my parole is over? Can I crash here until my court date? And that was 6 years ago, and they haven't left. And their friends are coming over and they're partying in the garage every night. And again, I'm talking children who are 40 and 50 years of age. We can help get that abuser out by an action in ejectment and also by quiet title. But again, these are long processes. But there are some things that people don't often think about because they're property and real estate law, actions of law about property, so they may not connect it, but that's something that we look at. We try to use everything we can to protect the victim and to remove them from the situation. I think I probably told more than I probably wanted to, and I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to field any questions if there are any, and I thank you for listening.
And then we had a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you can, if you have that available.
Sure.
I guess we'll start with Maureen's question. Is it a crime that long-term care facilities diagnose an 80-year-old with schizophrenia to prescribe antipsychotic medicine without report, as Lori Semenka talked of this morning? If not a crime, why not? It's a fraud diagnosis and then treatment to the harm of the resident and increased profit for the long-term care facility.
Great question, Maureen, and I think happens more than most people realize. Remember, I'm a civil attorney. We're not going to put AJ on the spot, but he's the criminal. He's the district attorney, right? He's the ADA here, so he might be better poised to answer that question. I'll look at it from the civil point of view, right? Which is that, yes, there would be civil actions that you could take there. And I said earlier in the presentation, remember that everything that's legal isn't necessarily ethical, and everything that's unethical isn't necessarily illegal. That's a lot of lawyer talk for you, but it's always going to be fact specific. But yes, I think there are civil cases there and there are civil remedies. Again, the problem is who would be bringing the suit, right? If it can't be that person themselves, how would you establish what's called standing? But I'm not going to say whether it's legal or not because it's really a question of a criminal law case. But is it actionable at civil law? Absolutely. Is it lawsuit worthy? Absolutely.
Brendan, I just put a link in the chat because this was a topic that had come up. The New York Times had done an investigation, I think, that they published last month. If you listen to podcasts, there was a daily episode in the New York Times about it. And it goes in depth, and it's a really good resource if you want to know more about the overprescriptions of antipsychotics in these facilities. Could there potentially be criminal liability? Absolutely. Is there? Do I think it would be probable that we would be able to prove these cases beyond a reasonable doubt? No, I think it would be very difficult. And the only way that criminal prosecution would get involved if something happened and the resident died as a result of the overprescriptions or some sort of death because of the prescription medication. So that's how we would get involved. But as far as the overprescription, maybe to control behavior or to improve ratings of the facilities, that's, as you had said, that's something where it would be maybe unethical, but not necessarily something that we're going to be able to charge with a crime. All right, so we have, they asked you to go back to the immediate step slides, which I think you're on now.
Yep, I think it's up there.
Okay.
Lost the
I guess
chat.
you want to leave that up, and I'll go to the next question. All right.
Absolutely.
So the next question is the only way to protect oneself against a non-family, non-intimate partner abuser to file a complaint with local law enforcement?
Again, these questions are really great and they're really interesting because this is what we face every day, right? Is this a civil matter? Is this a criminal matter? Is it both? Where do you go? It's going to depend on a lot of things. Is it the only way? Not necessarily. You can file civil actions for harassment, for stalking, that sort of thing. You can file a civil action for battery or battery and assault. But some of those things may, in fact, also be criminal and rise to the level of a crime. That would be for the police and then the district attorney to determine. But is it the only way? No, it's not the only way. But if you're looking for a remedy from the criminal law, then yes, it's the only way. Yeah.
And the PFA process does not necessarily involve local law enforcement. I mean, you can obtain a PFA, which could provide you, protection against an abuser who would qualify, but not involve the police. And the police would only get involved unless that PFA was violated.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right.
And if that PFA, remember, you don't need a police, you don't need the law enforcement, you don't need a lawyer to file these things, right? So that's a remedy that's there, and it's a powerful one. But you will need to have those things that we talked about in terms of requirements.
Okay. Ashley asked if an older adult and their child, for example, have a joint bank account, does that allow the child free reign to the funds being deposited?
Right. So my understanding of joint bank accounts means joint bank accounts, right? The bank doesn't look at who put what in. Lots of people have joint bank accounts and they say, well, that was my money and this was your money. By law, the way it works is if you have a joint account, each of you owns all of the assets in that account. So either one can take everything out without permission or notice to the other. Joint checking accounts are not a great idea, maybe unless you're married. Other than that, being a cynical and cautious attorney, I would say stay away from them.
Dawn had asked whether the slides are going to be available today. After today, from my understanding, they're going to be available on the YouTube playlist for the college. This was the YouTube channel where you heard the original introductions this morning, and I think they're going to be up within the next week or so. Marina followed up about asking about the removal of the license of the prescriber. I'm assuming regarding the antipsychotics. I don't know. I can't really speak on that. I know that you could make a referral to the licensing board, and they will investigate it. But I'm not sure what standard they use and what that process is. Maybe Brendan, I don't know whether you know anything about that, but
not any more specifically than that. But any person who's licensed by the state or the Commonwealth is subject to licensing restrictions, right, and to rules and regulations, and they can violate. And there are, like AJ said, there, for example, for attorneys, the same thing with us, but there are different standards and different procedures. Nevertheless, you should file a complaint if you feel that there was some sort of malpractice or some sort of, malintent. Then you should certainly file the complaint. And I don't have the information here, but if you go to Pennsylvania, you just go to the website, go Google pa.gov and look for medical licensing board or medical licensures in Pennsylvania. There probably will be an online way to make a complaint, which there usually is for other licensing agencies.
And I have a few questions for you that I was thinking of as you were speaking. We run into a lot of situations where the law enforcement thinks a crime has occurred and, we can prove it, but we don't necessarily have the cooperation of the elderly individual. Do you run into situations where, in your representation, where you think the same way, when you think the elderly individual should be prosecuting something further or acting in a certain way, but because you're their representative, you're kind of hamstrung in what you can do?
Absolutely. I think I was alluding to that throughout, right, where I kept saying that a lot of times I'm telling my clients, I really strongly advise that you file criminal charges. I really strongly advise you get in touch with the district attorney's office, and they don't. But I think it's true for any lawyer in any situation, but it's particularly acute here, and it's something that all of the attorneys who work here at Senior Law Center have to face every day. And I think we always have to go back to remembering the context, right? It's not my life, not my choice, right? And I don't speak for that person. The last thing that person needs is another person telling them, this is what you have to do, right? My job is to explain the law to them, to give them as many options as I can to say, when I know for certain, or if I don't know for certain, here's some of the things that might happen, here's some of the things that might not happen. And it takes a long time for someone to break that cycle of abuse. We have had many clients who have come back to us over the years, and we've also had some clients, I personally have had some clients who really surprised me, were absolutely adamant against moving forward against the defendant, and then had a moment of clarity or epiphany. And that's grace. I don't know how to explain that. But we always have to remember that we work for the client. The client is the boss. We are not the boss. And it's not for me or any attorney to put my values and my ideas about life. Clearly, I'm a big mouth with lots of ideas. So it's a balance. But no, we do run across it all the time. But I'm sure as the district attorneys have to work with it as well. there are times where you just have to say, this is a good case, this is a winnable case, this is wrong what's happened. But the complaining witness or the plaintiff, they don't want to go through with it. And that's hard. It's hard to walk away from that. But we have to, because we have to respect their autonomy. And the last thing that we're going to do is, talk to a victim again like they're, a child, right? You have to do this. No, that last thing we'll do. You want to do it sometimes, but we will not do it.
Melissa asks if the person who stole someone's money passed away, is there anything that can be done to recover the funds? We've started processes with Nova, but there will be about $8,000 in funds not recovered from those.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to presume that when you say you start processes with Nova, it's probably for a VCAP, right? For a Victims Compensation Assistance Program claim. I would need more facts, right? But here's the general principle. When a person dies, legally, they have an estate, right? People always think of this as huge, like mansions. No, you just have an estate. It could be your sneakers and, your car. So if that person has an estate, the deceased person has an estate, it's possible that you could sue the estate. But again, it's fact specific, and you'd have to also look at things like the statute of limitations. But is it possible to go after recovery of funds when the person who took the funds has died? It's possible. Doesn't mean that it's probable that it would work, but it's possible for sure.
And Brandon, this had just come up in a case that our office was prosecuting, and we had charged the individual, had worked our way through the preliminary hearing process. I think the restitution amount was $40,000, and she died between the time of not the victim, the defendant had died between the time of the preliminary hearing and trial. And once that happens, we're not able to prosecute the case anymore. We can't prosecute somebody once they're deceased.
Correct.
And because we're not able to prosecute, we're not able to get a restitution order to the elderly victim. So once the perpetrator dies in the criminal setting, we're out of luck basically. So
yeah. But the civil lawyers will always sue somebody. Just we'll always look for a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's our job.
All right. Are there any more questions out there? I think we answered all the ones from the chat. Right? This one's from Kathy. My 98-year-old father with multiple comorbidities as well as dementia, living in the secure memory care unit and an assisted living facility, signed his power of attorney over to a latecomer stepdaughter, and her attorney endorsed this to the alarm and dismay of the long-term care facility as well as our family. I reported this to APS and the DA's office, but they did not consider this worthy of investigation.
Okay, I'm not sure the question there, but I hear you. I would also just say I wouldn't assume that they thought it wasn't worthy. Remember, they also have a very high standard in the criminal law system. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So they may not have felt that they could go ahead and prosecute that case or bring those charges because they didn't have sufficient evidence. I don't think that they thought it wasn't worthy, right? There's a lot of things at play there, but the problem is that the victim, my understanding is that the victim is incapacitated. So you could challenge that, but he would be the one that have to challenge it unless, you or have another power of attorney, which doesn't sound like you do. You could certainly challenge the validity of the power of attorney, absolutely. And that would happen in Orphans Court, and that's the possible remedy. There may also be ways of sort of not going at it that way, but sort of going at it by suing for fraud, civil fraud, right? Or theft by deception or things like that. So, which are, some of those are criminal actions, but we also have civil versions of those. So that's what I'm only talking about, civil stuff, not criminal.
Any other questions? Brendan, is there any like income limits that you will, you won't represent somebody over a certain amount of income that they have that they should be able to afford a private attorney? Is there something like that?
No, not for our program. Remember, Senior Law Center has lots of different programs, and I'm only speaking about one program, which is the Victim Service Program. Because of our funding that comes from the Victims of Crime Act, we do not consider income. I've been a public interest lawyer my whole career. I have always worked with people who are living at or below poverty level. And even if you're living, quote unquote, above poverty level, trust me, it's poverty. So, but in this case, in the work that we do here, because of our funding, no, doesn't matter how much you make. You can't make too little, you can't make too much. If you're a victim of a crime or you're a victim of elder abuse, we will offer you services. That's part of our funding stream,
And it's 60 years of older and victim of a crime. Those are basically the two.
For victim services, correct. Yeah, for victim services. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We also have a helpline across the Commonwealth where anyone 60 or older from all 67 counties can call in and get general legal advice over the phone. But what we do here in Bucks and the other counties is direct legal representation. So we go to court, we advocate for people, and we work with the agencies like AJ's office and other folks to see what we can do to bring some sort of justice to a grave injustice here, right? So,
Dawn had asked if she has a victim of a significant scam, should I refer them to you for a legal assessment?
Sure.
How does someone, Brendan, how does somebody go about contacting your office? What information should they have when they contact you?
I'm going to go back to the slide, I think, if I may. Leave it up there. The easiest way is to go onto the website, which is www.seniorlawcenter.org, and that's www.seniorlawcenter.org. Here's our new address in Bucks County. So that's the Bucks County line and the Bucks County fax. So that's the most important thing that we don't really have a one size fits all. So if a person believes they've been victim of a scam or not ever, we want to talk to them, right? We want to find out what we can and see if we're in fact the right place for them to start, or if maybe there's another place where they should start. But we'll absolutely talk to anybody who is alleging that they're 60 years over or older and they're alleging that they've been a victim of abuse, any type of abuse, including fraud.
Joanne had asked if there's a similar agency such as yours in the Lehigh Valley, if you're aware.
I'm not aware. Again, what we do is so specific, and we've been doing it for 40 years, right? So I don't know. Now, there's lots of great legal aid agencies, right? But we are not a legal aid agency in the traditional sense, right? You can't just walk in and ask for help. You have to be 60 or over in order for us to provide you with services. So I don't know, but you could start by calling the area, AAA in Lehigh County, or sort of going on the Lehigh County government website and seeing if they have any kind of links to public interest things, or call the Bar Association up there and say, hey, do you know of any legal aid organizations that you work with? I'm sure there are some up there. I'm sure there are.
Right. Anybody else? All right. I don't think we have any more questions. Brendan, thank you. I actually learned a lot. I know I meet with you on a monthly basis, and I still learn a lot every time I speak to you. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone for attending. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me, certainly, and also I think Brendan would be happy to answer any questions that you
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, yep. And so it looks like at 4 o'clock, Ms. Bennett will be speaking in closing. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attention.